Garrett's massive frame fills the doorway, eyes dark with possession. "You tried to run," he growls, closing the distance between them. Caleb's back hits the wall, heart hammering. "I can't do this," he whispers, even as his body trembles with need. Garrett's hand cups his jaw. "Your mouth says stop, but everything else is begging me to continue." Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger as Caleb Monroe watched from behind the water trough, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had been hiding for nearly an hour now, ever since he'd seen the riders approaching the abandoned line shack where he'd taken shelter. 3 days on the run with nothing but the clothes on his back and a canteen that had run dry yesterday morning. 3 days since he'd fled the town of Redemption, with accusations of theft following him like vultures. He hadn't stolen anything. But when the marshal's son decided he wanted Caleb's horse and Caleb had refused, well, suddenly a week's wages went missing from the general store, and all fingers pointed at the drifter with no family and no ties. So Caleb had run, because staying meant a noose, and running at least gave him a chance. But now, his luck had run out. The riders were close enough that he could make out details. Not a posse, thank God. Just one man on a massive roan horse, leading a pack mule. But something about the way the man sat his saddle, the sheer size of him, made Caleb's mouth go dry, with a fear that tasted different than what he'd felt fleeing Redemption. The rider pulled up at the water trough, dismounting with an easy grace that belied his enormous frame. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. Dark hair fell to his collar beneath a black hat, and when he turned to water his horse, Caleb caught sight of a face that was all hard planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind into something almost brutal in its masculinity. "You can come out now," the man said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through Caleb's chest. "I know you're behind that trough, been tracking you since dawn." Caleb's breath caught. He stayed frozen, mind racing through options. Run, fight, neither seemed viable against a man that size. "I said come out." The voice hardened, taking on an edge that made every hair on Caleb's body stand at attention. "Don't make me come get you, boy. That won't end well for either of us." Something in the tone compelled obedience before Caleb's conscious mind could form a decision. He stood slowly, hands raised, emerging from behind the trough on legs that trembled with exhaustion and something else he didn't want to name. The man turned fully to face him, and Caleb had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, radiating a raw physical power that made Caleb feel small and exposed. Dark eyes studied him with an intensity that stripped away every defense, seeing things Caleb had spent his whole life trying to hide. "Please," Caleb heard himself say, hating the desperate edge in his voice. "I didn't do what they're accusing me of. I just need—" "I know you didn't." The man's voice was calmer now, but no less commanding. "Marshall's son is a known liar and a bully. Most folks in 3 territories know it, even if they won't say it out loud." He reached for his canteen and held it out. "Drink." Caleb stared at the canteen, then back at the man's face, searching for the trap. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you need help. And because I've been where you are, running from accusations that had nothing to do with truth and everything to do with power." He thrust the canteen forward again. "Drink before you pass out, then we'll talk about what happens next." The water was cool and clean, and Caleb drank too fast, choking on it as his body reminded him how desperately thirsty he was. When he finally lowered the canteen, gasping, he found the man watching him with an expression that made heat crawl up his neck. "Name's Garrett Wolf," the man said. "I own a ranch about 6 miles west of here. The Double R could use a hand with the horses if you're willing to work." Caleb's voice cracked. "Why would you offer me work? You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." Garrett's eyes traveled over him slowly, assessing. "I know you've got nowhere else to go. I know you're scared and exhausted and about 2 steps from complete collapse. And I know the look in your eyes when you watch me. Seen it before in men who spend their whole lives trying to pretend they don't feel what they feel." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. He took an involuntary step back, shaking his head. I don't know what you think you saw, but stop. The single word cracked like a whip, and Caleb's mouth snapped shut. Garrett moved closer, and suddenly he was right there, massive and overwhelming, close enough that Caleb could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm not accusing you of anything, boy. I'm offering you a choice. You can keep running, keep pretending, keep looking over your shoulder until someone catches up to you and puts a rope around your neck. Or you can come with me, work my ranch, earn honest pay, and stop lying to yourself about who you are. Caleb's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to deny, to put distance between himself and this man who saw too much. But his body betrayed him, refusing to move, drawn like iron to a lodestone by the sheer presence of Garrett Wolfe. I can't, he whispered, and wasn't even sure what he was refusing. The job? The implication? The terrifying promise in Garrett's eyes? Garrett reached out slowly, giving Caleb time to pull away, and cupped his jaw with one enormous hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm, and the touch sent electricity racing down Caleb's spine. Yes, you can, and you will, because I see you, Caleb Monroe, all of you, and I'm not scared of what I see. Caleb's whole body was trembling now, caught between terror and a longing so intense it hurt. How do you know my name? Asked around town before I rode out. Wanted to know what kind of trouble was chasing the boy I'd been hired to find. Garrett's thumb brushed across Caleb's cheekbone, and the gentleness of the gesture was almost more overwhelming than his size. Margaret Hendrick's father sent me. Seems you did some work for them last month. Fixed their barn roof when their regular hand took sick. She remembered you as honest and hard-working, and when her father heard about the accusations, he knew they were false. Asked me to track you down, bring you back to face things proper. Back? Caleb tried to pull away, but Garrett's hand tightened just slightly, holding him in place. Or, Garrett continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, you could come with me instead. Let me write to Hendrick. Tell him I found you, but you've taken employment elsewhere. He's a fair man. He'll let it drop, especially once his daughter tells him you're under my protection. Your protection. Caleb's voice came out breathy, uncertain. What does that mean? It means exactly what you think it means. Garrett's eyes held his, dark and intense and full of promise. It means you'd be mine. Under my roof, working my land, following my rules. It means safety, but it also means surrender. You'd have to stop running, stop hiding. You'd have to trust me with everything you've been too afraid to show anyone else. Caleb should have been terrified, should have jerked away from that possessive tone, from the assumption in Garrett's words. But instead, he felt something inside him crack open, a desperate need he'd spent years denying suddenly flooding to the surface. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I've never. I know. Garrett's other hand came up to frame Caleb's face, holding him with a gentleness that contradicted his size. That's why you need someone who does know, someone strong enough to make you stop fighting yourself, someone who'll take care of you while you learn who you really are. The words should have sounded arrogant, presumptuous. Instead, they sounded like salvation. Caleb's eyes burned with tears he refused to shed, his whole body aching with exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming relief of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in his life. What do you want from me? He whispered. Everything. Garrett's voice was rough with desire and something deeper. But we'll start with trust. Come with me. Let me feed you, give you a place to sleep, keep you safe. And when you're ready, when you've stopped looking for escape routes every 5 minutes, then we'll talk about the rest. Caleb closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of Garrett's hands on his face, the solid strength of his presence. Every rational thought told him this was dangerous, reckless, insane. But something deeper, something he'd been suppressing his entire life, whispered that this was right, that Garrett Wolfe was offering him exactly what he needed, even if accepting it meant admitting things about himself he'd never dared speak aloud. Okay, he breathed, opening his eyes to meet Garrett's intense gaze. "I'll come with you." Garrett's expression shifted, satisfaction and something almost tender crossing his face. "Good boy," he murmured, and the words sent heat flooding through Caleb's entire body. "Now, let's get you on a horse before you collapse. We've got a ride ahead of us." He released Caleb's face but kept one hand on his shoulder, steadying him as he led him to the horses. Caleb's legs felt weak, his head spinning with exhaustion and the emotional whiplash of the last few minutes. Garrett lifted him onto the horse with embarrassing ease, his hands spanning Caleb's waist completely, and the casual display of strength made Caleb's breath catch. "Hold on," Garrett said, swinging up into his own saddle, "and don't worry about falling, I'll catch you." They rode west as the sun climbed higher, and with every mile Caleb felt the life he'd known slipping away, replaced by something terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He snuck glances at Garrett's broad back, at the easy confidence with which he commanded his horse, and felt desire war with fear in his chest. What had he just agreed to? And why did the thought of finding out make him feel more alive than he had in years? The Double R Ranch appeared as the sun reached its peak, sprawling across a valley that seemed to stretch forever. It was bigger than Caleb had imagined, clearly the work of years of careful building and planning. The main house stood proud against the sky, and corrals full of horses spread out in every direction. "Home," Garrett said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "You're home now too, if you choose to stay." Caleb wanted to say that of course he'd stay. Where else would he go? But the words stuck in his throat because they both knew this was about more than just a job and a roof over his head. This was about the promise that had hung between them since the moment Garrett's hand touched his face, the unspoken understanding of what protection meant when offered by a man like Garrett Wolfe to a boy like Caleb Monroe. They dismounted, and Garrett led him into the house, past the curious stares of ranch hands working in the yard. Inside, it was cool and surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's dwelling. Garrett pointed him toward a chair at the heavy wooden table and busied himself at the stove, heating up stew from a pot that had been simmering there. Caleb sat in silence, too exhausted and overwhelmed to speak, watching as Garrett moved around his kitchen with practiced ease. When the bowl was placed in front of him, he ate, mechanically, barely tasting the food, but feeling strength slowly returning to his body with each bite. "When you're done," Garrett said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, "I'll show you where you'll sleep. You need rest before we discuss anything else." Caleb nodded, finishing the stew and setting down the spoon, with shaking hands. Garrett led him up a narrow staircase to a room at the end of the hall. It was simple but clean, with a bed that looked like heaven after 3 nights of sleeping on hard ground. "Rest," Garrett said from the doorway. "We'll talk when you wake up, about the work, about the rules, about what happens next." He left before Caleb could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Caleb stood in the middle of the room, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and confusion, and a fear that tasted like anticipation. He should leave, should wait until dark and slip away, put distance between himself and this overwhelming man who saw too much, promised too much, made him feel too much. But instead, he lay down on the bed, and within seconds, he was asleep. When Caleb woke, the room was dark, and for a moment he panicked, not remembering where he was. Then it all came flooding back. Garrett, the ranch, the promise of safety that came with strings he didn't fully understand yet, but felt in his bones. He sat up, noticing clean clothes laid out on the chair by the window. His own clothes, filthy and torn from days on the run, had been removed while he slept. The thought of Garrett in the room, watching him sleep, should have frightened him. Instead, it sent a strange thrill through his body. He dressed in the clean clothes, noting they fit reasonably well, and made his way downstairs. The house was quiet, but he could see lamplight coming from a room off the main hall. He found Garrett there, sitting at a large desk covered in papers and ledgers, looking every inch the successful rancher he clearly was. "Better?" Garrett asked, looking up. His eyes traveled over Caleb slowly, assessing, and Caleb felt heat rise to his face under the scrutiny. "Yes, sir. Thank you. For the food, the rest, the clothes. You'll earn it all," Garrett said. "I don't believe in charity. You work for what you get here. But I'm fair, and I take care of what's mine." That word again, possessive and claiming, making Caleb's pulse race. "Sit." Caleb sat in the chair across from the desk, feeling like he was being interviewed for something far more significant than a ranch hand position. Garrett leaned back, studying him with that intense focus that made Caleb feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "I need to know you understand what you've agreed to," Garrett said finally. "This isn't just employment. You're on the run from false accusations, which means you need protection, invisibility. You'll live in this house, not the bunkhouse. You'll eat at my table. You'll be my foreman ostensibly, which gives you authority and respect. But really?" He paused, his eyes darkening. "Really, you're mine, under my protection, under my care, under my authority. Do you understand what that means?" Caleb's mouth was dry. "I think so." "No, you don't. Not yet. But you will." Garrett leaned forward, his presence overwhelming, even with the desk between them. "It means I make the decisions. Where you go, what you do, who you speak to. It means you trust me to know what's best, even when you're scared, even when every instinct tells you to run. It means surrender, Caleb. Complete and total. Not of your will, but of your fear." "And if I can't?" Caleb whispered. "If I try, but I can't stop being afraid? Then I'll be patient. I'll push, but not too hard. I'll demand, but not more than you can give. I'll hold you when you break, and I'll put you back together stronger." Garrett's voice dropped to a rough whisper. "I've wanted someone like you for a long time, Caleb. Someone who needs what I can provide. Someone brave enough to accept it." Caleb's breath came faster. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." "I know. That's what makes it brave." Garrett stood and moved around the desk, and suddenly he was right there, towering over Caleb's chair. "Stand up." Caleb stood on shaking legs. Garrett's hand came up to cup his jaw again, thumb brushing across his lower lip in a gesture that was both tender and deeply possessive. "Last chance," Garrett said quietly. "I can give you supplies, a fast horse, a letter clearing your name. You can ride out of here and never look back. Or you can stay, and I promise you'll never be alone again, never have to hide, never have to pretend. But staying means giving me everything. Your trust, your truth, eventually your body, all of it. So choose carefully." Caleb looked up into Garrett's dark eyes and saw desire there. Yes, but also something that looked like caring, like protection, like home. Every word of refusal died on his lips. This man terrified him, but in a way that made him feel alive rather than hunted. And God help him, but he wanted it. Wanted to stop running, stop hiding, stop fighting himself. "I want to stay," he whispered. His voice broke. "I want you to teach me. Show me. I've never—" "I know," Garrett said, his voice going impossibly gentle. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time. But first, you need to understand something crucial." His grip tightened just slightly on Caleb's jaw, commanding his complete attention. "When I tell you to do something, you do it. Not because I'm cruel, but because I'm protecting you. From others, yes, but mostly from yourself. From the voice that tells you this is wrong, that you should be ashamed, that you don't deserve what you want. That voice is a liar, and I'm going to teach you to silence it." "How?" Caleb breathed. Garrett's lips curved into a smile that was equal parts tender and predatory. "By replacing it with my voice. By making sure you hear me every time that fear starts to rise. By showing you again and again that surrender isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you'll ever do." He released Caleb's jaw and stepped back, and Caleb swayed slightly at the loss of that grounding touch. "But not tonight. Tonight you eat a proper meal, and then you sleep in a real bed, and tomorrow we start teaching you what it means to be mine. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said, and the words felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Garrett's eyes flared with satisfaction. "Good. Now come, Dinner's waiting." They ate together at the kitchen table, and Garrett told him about the ranch, about the work they'd be doing, about the rules he'd need to follow. No going into town without Garrett. No discussing his past with the ranch hands. Complete honesty between them at all times, no matter how difficult. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb ventured as they cleaned up after the meal. "Always. Why me? You could have anyone. Why offer this to someone like me?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with methodical precision. "Because you need it," he said finally. "Because I see that hunger in you, the same one I had when I was younger, the need to belong to something, someone, completely. To stop making every decision, carrying every burden alone. Most men are too proud or too scared to admit they want that, but you're brave enough to consider it, even when it terrifies you. That's rare. That's valuable. That's worth protecting." Caleb felt tears sting his eyes at the understanding in Garrett's words. "I'm not brave," he repeated. "I'm just tired of running." "Then stop running," Garrett said simply. "I've got you now. You don't need to run anymore." That night, Caleb lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, his body thrumming with exhaustion and anticipation, and a fear that was gradually transforming into something else. Something that felt like hope. In the room down the hall, he could hear Garrett moving around, the creak of floorboards, the sound of water being poured. He thought about what tomorrow would bring, about the lessons Garrett had promised, about learning to surrender control he'd never really had in the first place. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first honest breath he'd taken in years. Sleep should have come easily after 3 nights of restless vigilance on the run, but instead, Caleb found himself wide awake, every nerve in his body alive with awareness of Garrett's presence just down the hall. His mind replayed every moment of their interactions, every touch, every word heavy with promise and implication. The way Garrett's hand had felt cupping his jaw, so large it could have easily hurt him, but had been infinitely gentle instead. The possessive certainty in his voice when he'd said, "mine." Caleb's whole body felt different, like something had shifted at a cellular level. For years, he'd kept himself locked down tight, refusing to acknowledge the way his eyes lingered on certain men, the heat that would flood through him when he saw displays of masculine strength and confidence. He'd told himself it was admiration, nothing more, that every man noticed when another commanded a room or handled a difficult situation with ease. But Garrett had stripped away that lie with a few simple words. "I see you," he'd said. And God, Caleb believed him. Believed that this man somehow understood the war that had been raging inside him since he was old enough to recognize desire, the constant battle between what he wanted and what he thought he was supposed to want. A soft knock on the door made him jump, his heart leaping into his throat. Before he could respond, the door opened and Garrett filled the doorway, backlit by the lamp he carried. In the shadows, he looked even larger, more imposing, and Caleb found himself sitting up in bed, suddenly very aware that he was wearing only the thin undershirt and drawers Garrett had provided. "Can't sleep?" Garrett's voice was quiet, intimate in the darkness. "No, sir," Caleb whispered, his mouth dry. Garrett entered the room, setting the lamp on the small table by the window. The warm light played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. He moved to sit on the edge of Caleb's bed, and the mattress dipped under his weight, rolling Caleb slightly toward him. "I thought you might have trouble," Garrett said. "First night in a new place, after everything you've been through. Mind's probably racing, trying to make sense of it all." Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice. This close, he could smell Garrett, leather and wood smoke, and something masculine and clean that made his head spin. "I want you to understand something," Garrett continued, his hand coming to rest on Caleb's knee through the blanket. The weight of it was grounding, anchoring. "What I'm offering you, it's not something to be ashamed of. I know the world has taught you otherwise, but the world is wrong about a lot of things." "How do you know?" Caleb's voice cracked on the words. "How do you know what I've been taught, what I've thought?" "Because I lived it too," Garrett said simply. Spent years thinking there was something wrong with me, something broken. Tried to fix it by working myself to exhaustion, by building this ranch into something successful, by proving I was just as much a man as anyone else. Maybe more, because I had to work twice as hard to convince myself. Caleb stared at him, surprised by the admission. What changed? I stopped fighting it. Met a man who showed me that strength isn't about denial. Real strength is accepting who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Garrett's hand moved from Caleb's knee to his face, cupping his jaw in that now familiar gesture. You're so young, too young to have already spent years at war with yourself. I can help you end that war, Caleb, but you have to let me. I don't know how, Caleb breathed, leaning into the touch despite himself. I don't know what you want from me. Right now, I want you to stop telling yourself this is wrong. When your body responds to my touch, when you feel that heat building inside you, I want you to accept it instead of fighting it. Can you do that? Caleb's breath came faster. His whole body was responding now, awakening to Garrett's proximity in ways he'd always suppressed before. I'm scared. I know. That's why I'm here. Garrett's thumb brushed across Caleb's lower lip, and Caleb couldn't stop the soft gasp that escaped. Fear and desire get all tangled up, especially when you've been taught to be afraid of what you want. But here, with me, you're safe. Nothing that happens between us is shameful or wrong. It's just honest. What if I can't be what you want? The question burst out before Caleb could stop it, raw and vulnerable. What if I'm not enough, or I do it wrong, or... Stop. Garrett's voice was firm, but not harsh. You're already enough, just as you are. I'm not asking you to be anything except honest about what you feel. And as for doing it wrong, his lips curved into a slight smile. That's why I'm going to teach you, guide you, show you exactly what I want and how to give it to me. But that's for later, when you're ready. Tonight, I just need you to accept this one truth. You wanting me is natural and right and nothing to be ashamed of. Tears burned in Caleb's eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? Because you need kindness, and because... Garrett paused, his expression becoming more serious. Because I see myself in you, the boy I was, before I learned to accept who I am. And I'll be damned if I let you spend years suffering the way I did, when I can offer you another path. The tears spilled over, and Caleb tried to turn away, embarrassed. But Garrett wouldn't let him. He used his thumbs to gently wipe away the tears, his touch impossibly tender for such a large, powerful man. It's okay to cry, Garrett murmured. It's okay to let it out. You've been holding so much inside for so long, trying to be strong, trying to survive, but you don't have to do that anymore. I've got you now. The words broke something in Caleb, and suddenly he was sobbing, all the fear and exhaustion and loneliness of the past few days, the past few years, pouring out. Garrett pulled him close, wrapping those massive arms around him, and Caleb buried his face in Garrett's chest and let himself fall apart completely. Garrett held him through it, one hand stroking his hair, murmuring quiet words of comfort. There was nothing sexual about it, just pure care and protection, and somehow that made it even more overwhelming. No one had held him like this since he was a child. No one had offered him comfort without expecting something in return. When the storm finally passed, Caleb found himself curled against Garrett's chest, exhausted but feeling lighter somehow, like he'd shed a weight. He'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. Better? Garrett asked quietly. Caleb nodded against his chest, then forced himself to pull back slightly, to meet Garrett's eyes. I'm sorry, that was necessary, Garrett finished, and nothing to apologize for. You've been through hell, and you've been carrying it alone. It's natural to break down once you're finally safe. Is that what I am? Caleb asked, his voice small. Safe? With me? Always. Garrett's hand came up to cup his face again, and this time when their eyes met, the intensity was different, still protective, still caring, but now with an edge of something deeper, darker, more demanding. But safe doesn't mean easy, Caleb. It doesn't mean I'm going to let you hide from yourself or from what you want. It means I'll push you, challenge you, Demand honesty even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Caleb's breath caught. The shift in Garrett's tone made his pulse race, made heat pool low in his belly. I don't understand. You will. Garrett's thumb brushed across his lips again, more deliberately this time, applying just enough pressure to part them slightly. Your body understands even if your mind doesn't yet. Look at you trembling. You're breathing all quick and shallow. Heart racing. Pupils dilated. His voice dropped lower, rougher. You're responding to me exactly the way you should, even though your mouth keeps saying you're scared, you're unsure, you don't know. But your body knows, doesn't it? Your body is telling you exactly what it wants. Caleb couldn't deny it. Every word Garrett spoke made the truth more obvious. He was aroused, terrified, confused, and desperate all at once, his body singing with awareness of Garrett's proximity, the weight of his hand, the heat of his gaze. Say it, Garrett commanded softly. Tell me what your body wants, even if you're afraid to want it. I can't, Caleb whispered, even as his body betrayed him, leaning into Garrett's touch. Yes, you can, and you will, because I'm not going to let you lie to me or to yourself. Garrett's free hand came up to rest against Caleb's chest, right over his racing heart. Feel that? That's your body screaming the truth you won't speak. So speak it. Tell me. Caleb's voice broke. I want. The words stuck in his throat, years of denial making them almost impossible to voice. But Garrett waited, patient and implacable, his eyes holding Caleb's with an intensity that made looking away impossible. I want you, Caleb finally gasped out, the admission tearing from somewhere deep inside. I want you to teach me, show me, I want. He broke off, overwhelmed, but Garrett's expression had transformed into something fierce and satisfied. Good boy, Garrett murmured, and the praise sent shivers through Caleb's entire body. That's exactly what I needed to hear. The first honest thing you've said since I found you. He stroked Caleb's face gently, almost reverently. You have no idea how beautiful you are right now. Finally telling the truth. Finally letting yourself want. Caleb's whole body was trembling, caught between embarrassment and a strange sense of liberation. He'd said it. He'd admitted what he'd spent years denying, and the world hadn't ended. Garrett hadn't recoiled in disgust or judgment. Instead, he looked almost proud. Now, Garrett said, his voice taking on that commanding edge again, I'm going to set some rules for you. Rules that will keep you safe and help you learn to trust yourself and me. Are you ready to hear them? Caleb nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. First rule, honesty. Always. No matter how embarrassing, how vulnerable it makes you feel. If I ask you a question, you answer truthfully. If you're afraid, you tell me. If you want something, you ask for it. Understood? Yes, sir. Second rule, you don't leave this ranch without my permission. Not because you're a prisoner, but because those accusations in redemption could still cause trouble. I need to know where you are, that you're safe. You want to go somewhere. You ask me first. Yes, sir. Third rule, when we're alone like this, you call me Garrett. Not sir, not boss. Just my name. I need you to see me as a man, not an authority figure, when we're being honest with each other. Yes, Caleb paused, corrected himself. Yes, Garrett. The satisfaction in Garrett's eyes was intoxicating. Good. Fourth rule, and this is important. You never lie about what your body wants or needs. If I touch you and it feels good, you don't hide it. If I do something that doesn't feel right, you tell me immediately. Your body's responses are nothing to be ashamed of. They're information, communication between us. Trust them. Trust me with them. Caleb's face burned with embarrassment, but he forced himself to nod. I understand. Do you? Garrett's hand slid from Caleb's chest down to his stomach, resting there lightly, and Caleb's entire body jolted at the contact. Because right now, your body is telling me very clearly that you like my touch, and yet you're fighting it, trying to hide it, probably telling yourself you shouldn't feel this way. Caleb couldn't deny it. Couldn't hide the way his breathing had changed, the way his muscles tensed and released under Garrett's hand. Stop fighting, Garrett commanded gently. Just feel. Accept that you like this, that you want more. There's no shame in it, Caleb. It's natural, it's honest, it's right. Slowly, deliberately, Caleb forced himself to stop resisting, to let his body respond without trying to suppress it. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Heat flooded through him, his breath coming faster, every nerve ending alive with awareness of Garrett's touch. There you go, Garrett murmured approvingly. See how much easier it is when you stop fighting yourself, how much better it feels. Caleb could only nod, lost in sensation, in the strange freedom of finally allowing himself to feel what he'd denied for so long. Garrett's hand moved higher, back to Caleb's face, tilting his chin up. One more rule for tonight, and then I'll let you sleep. Tomorrow begins your real education, but tonight is just about acceptance. The rule is this: when I tell you you're beautiful, you believe me. When I tell you you're doing well, you accept it. No arguing, no self-deprecation, no denying the truth I see in you. Understood? Caleb wanted to protest, to say he wasn't beautiful, wasn't anything special. But Garrett's eyes held a warning, reminding him of the honesty rule. Understood? Garrett repeated, his voice firm. Yes, Garrett. Good. He leaned in, and for a heart-stopping moment Caleb thought he might kiss him. But instead, Garrett pressed his lips to Caleb's forehead, a gesture of tenderness that somehow felt more intimate than anything else that had happened. Sleep now. Tomorrow we start working with the horses and you'll show me what you can do. And tomorrow night we continue this conversation. You're going to have questions, doubts. That's normal. But I'll be here to answer them, to guide you, to help you understand that what we're building together is nothing to fear. He stood, and Caleb immediately felt the loss of his warmth, his presence. Garrett picked up the lamp and moved to the door, then paused and looked back. You did well tonight, Caleb. Admitting the truth, letting yourself be vulnerable, accepting my care. I'm proud of you. Sleep on that. Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Caleb alone with his racing thoughts and the lingering warmth of his touch. But this time, instead of anxiety and confusion, Caleb felt something different settling over him. A strange peace, an acceptance of what he was, what he wanted, what he was becoming. He lay back down, pulling the blankets up, and this time when sleep came, it was deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who had finally stopped running. Caleb Monroe had spent his whole life hiding, running, denying who he was and what he needed. But now, in the hands of a man who seemed to see straight through every defense to the truth underneath, he was about to discover what it meant to stop fighting and start living. And as sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was that maybe, just maybe, being caught was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the Double R Ranch in a silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Caleb stood in the doorway of the barn, watching white flakes drift down through the gray morning light, and felt a contentment he had never known before. Behind him, he could hear Garrett moving through the stalls, his boots crunching on fresh straw, his low voice murmuring to the horses. 3 months had passed since that night in the barn, when everything had changed. 3 months of learning to exist in the space between what the world saw and what they knew to be true. It was a delicate balance, requiring constant vigilance, but somehow they had made it work. The ranch hands respected Garrett too much to question why his foreman now took meals at the main house, or why Caleb's quarters had quietly shifted from the bunkhouse to the small room adjoining Garrett's office. "Storm's coming in hard," Garrett said, appearing at Caleb's shoulder. He stood close enough that their arms brushed, a small touch that sent warmth through Caleb's chest. "We should bring the horses in from the far pasture before it gets worse." Caleb nodded, but before he could move, Garrett's hand caught his wrist, thumb pressing against his pulse point in a gesture that had become familiar, intimate, their secret language spoken in touches too brief for others to notice. "After," Garrett said quietly, his voice dropping to that rough whisper that made Caleb's breath catch. "When the work's done and the hands have gone to town, stay with me. We'll have the evening to ourselves." The promise in those words made Caleb's heart race. They had learned to steal moments together, careful and cautious, but the longing for more never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day, a fire that banked but never went out. They worked together, bringing in the horses, moving in the synchronized rhythm they had developed over months of partnership. Caleb watched Garrett gentle a nervous mare, his large hands surprisingly tender, and felt that familiar ache of wanting. Not just physical desire, though that simmered constant beneath his skin, but a deeper yearning to be known completely, to drop the masks they wore for the world. By the time they finished, snow was falling thick and fast, and the ranch hands were already saddling up for their weekly trip to town. Red Sullivan, the oldest of the crew, tipped his hat to Garrett as he passed. "Don't wait up, boss. Saloon's got a new girl singing tonight, and the boys are eager to hear her. We'll be back come morning." Garrett nodded, his expression neutral, but Caleb felt the tension in him, the barely contained anticipation. They watched the hands ride out, their shapes disappearing into the white curtain of snow, and then they were alone, truly alone, in a way they rarely were. The silence stretched between them, suddenly charged with possibility. Garrett turned to Caleb, and the look in his eyes made Caleb's mouth go dry. "Come inside," Garrett said, and it wasn't a request. They walked to the main house through the falling snow, not touching but acutely aware of each other. Inside, Garrett built up the fire while Caleb shed his wet coat, his hands trembling slightly. The room filled with warmth and flickering light, creating an intimate cocoon that felt separate from the rest of the world. Garrett poured whiskey into 2 glasses and handed one to Caleb, their fingers brushing in a deliberate touch that sent electricity up Caleb's arm. They stood close, the firelight casting shadows across Garrett's face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. "I've been thinking," Garrett began, his voice low and rough, "about what we have here, about what it means." Caleb's heart hammered. "And what does it mean?" Garrett set his glass down and stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his skin. "It means you're not just my foreman. You're not just someone passing through. You're mine, Caleb, and I'm yours. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise, even to ourselves." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that felt more binding than any legal contract. Caleb's breath came faster, his whole body alive with awareness of Garrett's presence, of the intensity of his gaze. "I've never belonged to anyone before," Caleb whispered. "Never wanted to, but with you it feels different. It feels right." Garrett's hand came up to cup Caleb's jaw, thumb brushing across his cheekbone in a touch so gentle it made Caleb's chest ache. "I spent so many years alone building this place, thinking that was enough, but you made me realize I was just existing, not living. You make me want things I thought I'd given up on." "What things?" Caleb asked, though he thought he knew the answer, could see it burning in Garrett's eyes. "Everything," Garrett said roughly. "A partner who understands me, someone to build a life with, not just a ranch, nights that aren't empty, mornings that mean something." His thumb traced the line of Caleb's lower lip, and Caleb's breath stuttered. "You." The word fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything. Caleb felt stripped bare, every defense he had ever built dissolving under the intensity of Garrett's gaze. This was the moment, he realized. The edge they had been dancing around for months. Step forward and everything changed. Step back and they could pretend they were still safe. But Caleb had never wanted safety. He wanted this fierce, complicated man who looked at him like he was something precious and wild all at once. "Then take what you want." Caleb breathed and saw something ignite in Garrett's eyes. The distance between them evaporated. Garrett's hand slid to the back of Caleb's neck, pulling him close until their foreheads touched, their breath mingling in the space between. For a heartbeat they stayed like that, trembling on the edge of something vast and transformative. Then Garrett closed the final distance, and the world caught fire. The kiss was nothing like Caleb had imagined in his lonely nights. It was fierce and tender all at once, Garrett's lips claiming his with a hunger that had been building for months. Caleb's hands found Garrett's shoulders, gripping tight as everything he had kept buried surged to the surface. Years of denial, of hiding, of convincing himself he didn't deserve this. All of it burned away in the heat between them. Garrett kissed him like he was trying to memorize the taste of him, like he had been starving and Caleb was sustenance itself. His hands were everywhere, sliding through Caleb's hair, gripping his waist, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them, and Caleb matched him with equal intensity, pouring every unspoken word, every secret longing into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb felt fundamentally changed. Garrett's eyes were dark with desire and something deeper, something that looked like wonder. "I've wanted to do that since the first day you rode onto my land," Garrett said roughly, his voice wrecked. "Wanted to know if you would taste as good as you looked, if touching you would feel like coming home." "And does it?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper. Garrett's answer was to kiss him again, softer this time but no less consuming. They stood wrapped in each other as the fire crackled and snow fell outside, the rest of the world forgotten. Every touch was a revelation, every shared breath a promise. Caleb had spent his life drifting, never belonging anywhere, but in Garrett's arms he finally understood what it meant to be anchored. Time lost meaning. They moved together to the couch near the fire, unwilling to break contact even for a moment. Garrett pulled Caleb onto his lap, and the feeling of being held, of being wanted so completely, made Caleb's eyes sting with unexpected emotion. "Hey," Garrett said softly, catching the shine of tears in the firelight. His thumb brushed them away with infinite gentleness. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Caleb said, his voice thick. "That's the problem. This feels too good, too right, and I keep waiting for something to destroy it." Garrett's arms tightened around him. "I won't let that happen. You hear me? We'll be careful. We'll protect what we have. But I'm not losing you, Caleb. Not to fear, not to the world's judgment. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened Caleb, should have triggered his instinct to run. Instead, it made him feel safe in a way he never had before. For the first time in his life, someone was claiming him, fighting for him, refusing to let him disappear. They stayed like that for hours, wrapped in each other, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. Garrett told him about the loneliness of building this ranch alone, about the expectations that had always weighed on him, about the moment he had seen Caleb ride through his gates and felt something shift in his chest. Caleb shared pieces of his past he had never told anyone, about the towns he had fled, the close calls with discovery, the years of convincing himself he was better off alone. "We're both fools," Garrett said with a rough laugh, his fingers tangling in Caleb's hair. "Spending all those years thinking we had to be solitary, when what we really needed was each other." "Maybe we had to go through all that," Caleb replied, "to be ready for this, to understand what it means." The fire burned low, and eventually they moved to Garrett's bedroom, a space Caleb had never entered before. It was simple but comfortable, dominated by a large bed covered in heavy quilts. The intimacy of being in Garrett's private space made Caleb's pulse race with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Garrett seemed to sense his tension. He pulled Caleb close again, one hand cupping his face, his eyes searching. "We don't have to rush anything. We have time, all the time in the world." But Caleb shook his head. "I've waited my whole life for this. For you. I don't want to wait anymore." What followed was a slow exploration, a discovery of each other that was both tender and intense. Garrett was patient despite the hunger Caleb could feel thrumming through him, taking time to learn what made Caleb gasp, what made him tremble, and Caleb gave himself over to it completely, surrendering every defense, every wall he had built to protect himself. They learned each other in the language of touch and breath and whispered words, creating something entirely their own. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, the firelight casting shadows on the walls, the sound of snow against the windows, and the overwhelming feeling of finally being whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Caleb's head on Garrett's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. Garrett's fingers traced lazy patterns on Caleb's back, and the contentment that filled the space between them felt almost sacred. "Stay here," Garrett murmured, his lips against Caleb's hair. "Not just tonight, always. Make this house ours, not just mine." Caleb lifted his head to look at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath the request. "You sure? That's a risk. People will talk." "Let them talk. I'll tell them I need my foreman close to discuss ranch business. Hell, I'll tell them whatever they need to hear. But the truth is, I can't sleep in this bed anymore without you in it. Can't imagine walking into this house and not having you here." The emotion in Garrett's voice undid something in Caleb. He kissed him slowly, pouring everything he felt into it. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me." "That's going to be a very long time," Garrett said, pulling him closer. "Fair warning." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Caleb woke in the gray light of dawn, still held secure in Garrett's arms, he felt a peace he had never known. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world transformed and pristine. Inside, something equally transformative had occurred, and Caleb knew with absolute certainty that his days of drifting were over. He had found his home. The weeks that followed established a new normal. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Caleb was still the foreman, Garrett still the boss. But in the privacy of the main house, they built a life together. They cooked meals side by side, discussing the day's work. They sat by the fire in the evenings, Garrett going over the ranch accounts while Caleb mended tack or read from the books in Garrett's small library. And at night, they shared the big bed, learning each other's rhythms, creating intimacy in 1,000 small ways. But the secrecy took its toll. There were moments when Caleb ached to reach for Garrett in public, to touch him freely without calculating who might see. Times when hearing the Hands joke about trips to visit women in town made him feel hollow, reminded him of what he and Garrett could never openly claim. One afternoon, Caleb was working with a young colt in the corral when he heard horses approaching. He looked up to see a group of men he didn't recognize riding toward the ranch house, their bearing suggesting they were men of means and authority. Something about them made the hair on the back of his neck rise. Garrett came out of the house to meet them, and Caleb watched the exchange from a distance, noting the tension in Garrett's shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when the men finally rode away, Garrett stood motionless in the yard, his face dark with anger or worry or both. Caleb finished with the colt and walked over, keeping his voice low. "Who were they?" "Cattlemen's Association," Garrett said tersely. "Came to make me an offer on the ranch. Said they're buying up all the land in this valley, combining it into one big operation. They made it clear that refusing would be unwise." Caleb's stomach clenched. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it." Garrett's jaw tightened. "But we both know what that means. They'll be back with pressure, maybe worse than pressure." That night, the worry hung between them. They sat by the fire, but the usual comfort was missing, replaced by a tension that made Caleb's skin feel too tight. "If you sold," Caleb said carefully, "where would you go?" Garrett looked at him sharply. "You mean where would we go?" The casual certainty of it made Caleb's chest ache. "I just meant, I know what you meant." Garrett stood and crossed to where Caleb sat, kneeling in front of him so they were eye level. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You understand? I'm not making decisions about my life anymore without considering your part of it." Caleb cupped Garrett's face, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones. "This ranch is everything you've built. I won't let you give it up for me. You're not making me give up anything." Garrett caught Caleb's wrists, holding them gently. "You're what I'm choosing to keep. The ranch is land and buildings. Important, yes, but you're what makes it home." The words broke something open in Caleb, and he pulled Garrett up and into his arms, holding him tight. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, preparing for whatever storms might come. The Cattlemen's Association returned a week later, and this time they brought different tactics. Word spread through the territory that any rancher who sold would get fair price, but those who held out might find themselves facing difficulties. Mysterious fence breaks, cattle gone missing, water sources mysteriously fouled. Garrett refused to be intimidated. He doubled the night watch, kept careful inventory of his stock, and made sure everyone on the ranch understood they were to report anything suspicious immediately. But Caleb could see the stress wearing on him, could feel the tension building like a storm waiting to break. It happened on a cold night in late January. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke and Garrett already out of bed, pulling on his boots. They ran outside to find the hay barn engulfed in flames, the fire spreading fast despite the snow on the ground. The hands were already forming a bucket line, but it was clear the barn was lost. The best they could do was keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. They worked through the night, exhausted and smoke-stained, and by dawn the barn was nothing but smoldering ruins. Red Sullivan found the evidence at first light. Kerosene cans hidden in the brush nearby, still reeking of fuel. This was no accident. Garrett stood looking at the destruction, his face carved from stone. Caleb wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but the hands were watching, and he had to maintain the careful distance they showed in public. The frustration of it burned almost as hot as the fire had. That evening, after the hands had been fed and sent to rest, Caleb found Garrett in his office, staring at the account books. The loss of the hay barn was a significant blow, both financially and practically. "We'll rebuild," Caleb said quietly, closing the door behind him. "With what?" Garrett's voice was harsh with frustration. "That hay was for winter feed. Without it, I'll have to buy from suppliers at inflated prices. The barn itself will cost a fortune to replace, and all of it's happening because I won't sell to men who think they can bully me into submission." Caleb crossed to him, unable to maintain distance any longer. He placed his hands on Garrett's shoulders, feeling the tension knotted there. "Then we fight smarter. We document everything. We get the territorial marshal involved. We make enough noise that they can't operate in shadows anymore." Garrett reached up and covered one of Caleb's hands with his own, the touch anchoring them both. "I'm putting you at risk. You know that, right? If they're willing to burn buildings, they won't hesitate to hurt people who get in their way. Then it's a good thing I'm not planning on getting out of the way," Caleb said firmly. "You told me we face things together. That means the fights too, not just the easy parts." Garrett turned in his chair and pulled Caleb down onto his lap, needing the contact even though they both knew it was dangerous with the hands so close by. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," Caleb said, kissing him softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The investigation that followed was tense and frustrating. The territorial marshal came, looked at the evidence, and promised to investigate, but Caleb could see the skepticism in his eyes. Proving who was responsible would be nearly impossible, and everyone knew it. But Garrett's refusal to be intimidated sparked something in the other ranchers. One by one, they began standing up to the association's pressure. A meeting was called at the town hall, and for the first time, the ranchers presented a united front. Caleb went with Garrett, watching from the back as the men argued about property rights and fair business practices. He saw the respect in the other ranchers' eyes when Garrett spoke, saw them rally behind his leadership, and he felt a fierce pride that this strong, principled man was his. The association backed down, at least temporarily. The pressure eased, and life on the Double R slowly returned to normal. They rebuilt the hay barn, this time with better security measures. The horses thrived under their combined care, and through it all, Caleb and Garrett grew closer, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the land into something beautiful. Green grass pushed through the melting snow, and the horses grew sleek and healthy in the warming sun. Caleb worked alongside Garrett, training new colts, mending winter damage, preparing for another season. One evening, they stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Garrett's hand found Caleb's, their fingers interlacing in the privacy of twilight. "You know what I realized?" Garrett said quietly. "This view is the same one I've watched for years, but it looks different now. Better, because you're here to see it with me." Caleb squeezed his hand. I was thinking the same thing. I've drifted across half the West, seen sunsets in a dozen territories, but none of them felt like this. Like what? Like home. Garrett turned to him, his eyes soft in the fading light. You are home, Caleb. Not just for me. You made this place feel like more than land and buildings. You made it feel alive again. They stood there as darkness fell, hands clasped, watching the first stars appear. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, horses nickering in their stalls, wind rustling through new grass. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in its way, but it held everything that mattered. They had fought for this, for the right to stand together, to build something lasting in a world that didn't want to understand. The road ahead challenges would require continued vigilance and care. But they had proven they could weather storms, could face pressure and threats, and still hold on to what they had built. That night, lying tangled together in the big bed, Garrett's fingers tracing idle patterns on Caleb's skin, they talked about the future, about expanding the horse training operation, about the colts showing promise, about the small improvements they wanted to make to the ranch. I've been thinking, Garrett said hesitantly, about making some changes to my will, making sure that if something happens to me, the ranch goes to you, that you're protected. Caleb went still. Garrett, I know it's risky. People might question it, but I need to know you'll be taken care of, that everything we've built together won't just vanish if something happens. The emotion in his voice made Caleb's throat tight. He rolled over to face Garrett, needing to see his eyes in the moonlight. Nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to grow old together, getting cranky and gray, arguing about which colts to train and whose turn it is to cook dinner. Garrett smiled, but there was something serious beneath it. Promise me you'll stay even then, when I'm old and cranky and my knees give out from too many years in the saddle. I promise, Caleb said solemnly. Through cranky and gray and bad knees and whatever else comes, you're stuck with me, Garrett Wolf. Good, Garrett said, pulling him close. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. They made love slowly that night, taking time to savor every touch, every whispered word. It was different from the desperate hunger of their first times together, tempered now by familiarity and deepening emotion. They had moved past the phase of discovery into something richer, more complex. This was partnership, intimacy that went beyond physical desire, into genuine connection. Afterward, as Caleb drifted toward sleep in Garrett's arms, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. All the years of running, of hiding who he was, of convincing himself he was better off alone. It had all led to this moment, to this man, to this life they were building together. He had come to the Double R Ranch expecting nothing more than a job. Instead, he had found everything he never knew he needed. A home, a partner, a future that stretched out full of possibility instead of empty and cold. I love you, he murmured, the words coming easy in the darkness. Garrett's arms tightened around him. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anything. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and in the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and precious, something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and the prairie wind whispered through the grass. The Double R Ranch stood solid and peaceful, home now to two men who had learned that the greatest courage was not in facing down threats or building empires, but in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to trust, to love, despite the risks. As dawn broke over the eastern ridge, painting the world in shades of rose and gold, Caleb woke to find Garrett already awake, watching him with an expression so tender it made his heart ache. "Mornin'," Garrett said softly, brushing hair back from Caleb's forehead. "Mornin'," Caleb replied, smiling, ready to face another day. "With you, always?" They rose together and began their day, moving through the familiar routines with the ease of long practice. But there was a lightness to it now, a joy that infused even the mundane tasks. They were building something that would last, something that would endure beyond the challenges and the secrecy and the judgment of the world. In the corral, Devil trotted over to greet Caleb, the once wild stallion now gentle and trusting. Caleb ran his hand along the horse's neck and smiled, thinking about transformation, about how fear and fury could become trust and devotion with patience and understanding. He looked over to where Garrett stood talking with Red Sullivan, his broad shoulders straight, his presence commanding, and he felt a surge of gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. For this man who had seen him, really seen him, and chosen to love him anyway. For this life they were creating together, built on honesty and courage and unwavering loyalty. The sun climbed higher, warm in the air, and the work of the ranch continued. But underneath it all, running like a current beneath the surface, was the knowledge that they had found something extraordinary, not despite the challenges they faced, but perhaps because of them. They had learned that love was not weakness, but strength. That vulnerability was not surrender, but courage. That choosing each other every day, in the face of a world that would judge them, was an act of defiance and devotion all at once. And as the day unfolded, full of work and purpose, and the quiet companionship of two souls who had finally found their home in each other, Caleb understood that this was what he had been searching for all along. Not just a place to rest, but a reason to stay. Not just acceptance, but belonging. Not just survival, but life in its fullest, richest sense. He had found it here, in the arms of a man who commanded respect from everyone but saved his gentleness for Caleb alone. In the wide open spaces of the West, where they could breathe freely, could build something lasting, could love without apology despite the need for discretion. The Double R Ranch stretched around them, solid and real, a testament to what determination and hard work could build. But the true foundation was not the land or the buildings or the horses. It was the bond between two men who had chosen each other, who had fought for the right to stand together, who had learned that the most valuable thing you could own was another person's trust. As evening fell once more, and they walked together toward the house, shoulders brushing in that casual intimacy that spoke of deep familiarity, Caleb realized he had finally stopped running, had finally found a reason to plant roots, to invest in tomorrow, to believe in a future that included happiness and partnership and love. Garrett held the door open for him, and their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. No words were needed. They both knew what they had, knew its value, knew they would guard it fiercely against anything that threatened it. Inside, they moved through the evening rituals that had become precious in their familiarity. Dinner prepared together, easy conversation about the day, shared laughter over small things. And later, in the privacy of their room, they came together with a tenderness that never grew old, a passion that never dimmed, a connection that only deepened with time. This was their life now, built in the margins, protected carefully, but no less real for its secrecy. They had found a way to exist in a world that did not want to make space for them, had carved out a place where they could be themselves completely. And as Caleb fell asleep that night, held safe in Garrett's arms, he whispered a silent thank you to whatever force of fate or chance or divine providence had led him to that gate 3 months ago, had given him the courage to stay, had brought him home at last. The future stretched ahead, full of unknowns and challenges yet to come. But they would face it together, these two men bound by choice and love and unbreakable loyalty. And that, Caleb knew with absolute certainty, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.